On March 4, 1945, American bombers approached what they believed was southern Germany. The war was almost over. Nazi industry was collapsing. Crews inside B-24 Liberators checked coordinates one last time before releasing their payload. Below them was not Germany. It was neutral Switzerland. Within minutes, bombs exploded across the industrial district of Zurich. Warehouses burned. Civilians ran through smoke-filled streets. A country that had refused to join the war was suddenly under American attack. 9 people were killed. Dozens were wounded. And in Washington, officials realized something terrifying. The most powerful air force in the world had just bombed the wrong nation. By early 1945, the United States Army Air Forces had perfected large-scale daylight bombing. Hundreds of aircraft could cross Europe in tight formation, escorted by fighters, striking deep inside the collapsing Third Reich. But even in 1945, bombing accuracy depended on fragile systems. Pilots relied on dead reckoning, wind calculations, radio beacons, and visual landmarks. Heavy cloud cover over southern Germany that morning forced crews to adjust their route. Strong winds pushed formations slightly off course. It wasn't a dramatic deviation. It wasn't reckless flying. It was a subtle drift, just enough to matter. Through gaps in the clouds, bombardiers saw rail lines and factory-like structures near a river. It matched the description of targets near the German border. Bomb bay doors opened. Bombs fell. No one inside those aircraft believed they were striking a neutral country. When the bombs hit, Zurich did not react like Berlin. There were no anti-aircraft batteries firing into the sky, no sirens screaming in anticipation of another Allied raid, no blackout discipline in place. Switzerland was neutral. The explosions tore into warehouses near the Sill River. Windows shattered across entire blocks. Shockwaves rolled through residential streets where civilians were buying bread, unloading deliveries, or walking home from work. One bomb struck close to a railway yard. Another detonated beside storage facilities packed with goods meant for export. Debris rained down like iron hail. People who had lived through 5 years of European war without being invaded suddenly found themselves in the middle of it. Fires began spreading faster than local crews could contain them, and for several terrifying minutes, no one knew who was attacking or why.
Inside the American bombers, crews regrouped after the drop. Standard procedure. They turned toward home, but as clouds shifted, something felt wrong. There were no visible flak bursts, no German fighter response, no concentrated anti-aircraft fire. Bombardiers began comparing notes. Some noticed the architecture looked different. Swiss cities, unlike heavily bombed German targets, appeared intact, cleaner, less scarred. Certain landmarks did not match expected reconnaissance photographs. Doubt crept in. By the time radio chatter began questioning the coordinates, the bombs were already on the ground. It would take hours before confirmation reached command, hours before Washington realized the truth. The target that morning had not been inside Nazi Germany. It had been Switzerland, neutral, independent, not at war with the United States.
By late afternoon, officials in Zurich had confirmed what witnesses already knew. The aircraft were American. Fragments of bomb casings carried English markings. Survivors described large 4-engine bombers, the kind associated with U.S. daylight raids over Germany. Switzerland had spent 5 years walking a razor's edge, surrounded by Axis territory, trading cautiously, mobilizing defensively, but never entering the war. Neutrality had been its shield. Now that shield felt paper-thin.
The Swiss government immediately lodged a formal protest through diplomatic channels. Messages were sent to the American legation in Bern, demanding explanation. How could the United States, a nation fighting for the liberation of Europe, bomb a country that had not fired a single shot? In Washington, reports began arriving almost simultaneously with Swiss protests. Initial reaction inside the Army Air Forces was disbelief, then silence, then damage control.
The United States could not deny what had happened. Flight paths were reviewed, weather data analyzed, navigator logs examined. The conclusion was unavoidable. Strong winds and poor visibility had pushed bomber formations off course. Crews believed they were attacking German rail infrastructure near the border. Instead, they had crossed into neutral airspace. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was informed. By 1945, Roosevelt was already gravely ill. The war in Europe was nearing its end. Strategic bombing had become routine. But bombing a neutral democracy was not routine. An official apology was issued. The United States formally acknowledged responsibility. Compensation negotiations followed. Eventually, millions of dollars were paid to Switzerland for damages, one of the rare cases during WW2 where the U.S. publicly admitted fault for an airstrike. But money could not erase the psychological shock. For the Swiss public, neutrality no longer felt absolute. And for American commanders, the incident was a reminder. Even with hundreds of aircraft and advanced planning, war still depended on human judgment and human error. And this was the detail that complicated everything. Zurich was not an isolated accident. In previous years, American bombs had also fallen on Basel and other border regions. Each time, navigation errors were blamed. Each time, compensation followed. But repeated mistakes made neutrality fragile. Switzerland had avoided invasion by Germany. It had survived the collapse of France. It had mobilized its army in case of attack. Yet the only bombs that struck Zurich in 1945 came from Allied aircraft. It was a bitter irony of modern warfare. High-altitude bombing, dependent on weather and instruments, turned geography into guesswork. And guesswork in war kills civilians. By 1945, strategic bombing had become a normalized instrument of war. American air doctrine believed that destroying rail hubs, factories, and oil depots would collapse the enemy's ability to fight. Precision bombing was the ideal. Reality was different. Cloud cover, wind drift, human fatigue, mechanical limitations, every raid carried uncertainty. The strike on Zurich forced an uncomfortable question. If the world's most advanced air force could mistake neutral Switzerland for Nazi Germany, how precise was precision bombing really? In public statements, the incident was described as tragic but understandable, a navigation error, an unfortunate deviation. Privately, commanders knew something else. High-altitude bombing at hundreds of miles per hour left little room for correction once bombs were released. And once released, they could not be recalled. Unlike Dresden or Berlin, Zurich was never reduced to ashes. The damage was limited compared to other European cities. 9 dead, dozens injured, several buildings destroyed. In the scale of World War II, those numbers were small, but neutrality had been broken. After the war, the incident faded from American public memory. It did not fit the narrative of liberation. It did not align with victory parades. There was no grand memorial in the United States for Zurich, no famous speech, no Hollywood film. Yet in Switzerland, March 4, 1945, remained a reminder that modern war did not always respect borders, even when those borders were neutral. The bombing of Zurich was not an act of malice. It was not an intentional violation. It was a product of modern warfare conducted at industrial scale. And it was not the only time American bombs fell where they were not meant to. In July 1944, during Operation Cobra in Normandy, American aircraft would mistakenly bomb their own troops. In other cities across Europe, navigational errors would cost civilian lives. The lesson was harsh. Air superiority did not eliminate uncertainty. Technology did not eliminate human error. And even the side fighting to end tyranny could make deadly mistakes. The sky did not distinguish between enemy and neutral. Only coordinates did, and coordinates could be wrong. On March 4, 1945, the war reached a country that never chose to fight. Not because of strategy, not because of invasion, but because of a few degrees off course in the sky.